I generally feel a little bit safer around behind the podium because I don't know what to do with my hands most of the time. But I'm going to figure it out this time. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Andrew Maiden, with the Baltimore People's Power Assembly and the Baltimore branch of the Workers' World Party, and also the Baltimore Agent Resistance and Solidarity. I wanted to sort of talk about sort of understanding what fascists in the United States are, and use that to sort of segue into like my favorite side right here, crush capitalism.
Yes.
I think one of the things that we need to be really precise about as a movement against white supremacy is what fascism means, because it is not just a word that it should not just be a word that we throw at anything we don't like, right? Fascism is a very specific, measurable historical phenomenon that has very specific indicators and very specific ideologies like underlying it. And I think it shows itself in some of the videos that we saw. It shows itself whenever you talk to a fascist. Not that we're here talking to fascists, but like engaging with them online or shouting at them in the streets, is they have this thing about purity, right? And this is the undergirding ideology of it. It is a protection, it is a violent protection using, whether it's using the state, whether it's using private armies, whether it's using state apparatuses to protect this very idea of a pure human race, of a pure nation a lot of the time. And what that generally means is mother, father, right? Is part of that is the nuclear family, right? Part of it is white skin. But make no mistake, it doesn't have to be that, right? Because there are fascists that exist. Like my mother's from the Philippines. There is a fascist party in the Philippines. I know that seems very, very strange to some people, but it's really about, it's not as strange when you consider that Japan was one of the fascist nations, right? It is about this ideal purity, and anything that sort of interrupts that purity and that very ideal idea, it is something that degrades that society. It is something that besmirches it, it soils it, and this is what fascists hope to prevent by violence, by force, by state violence. It's very, very specific. Under capitalism, under imperialism, fascism takes a very specific class character, and it is basically, the too long didn't read version is that what fascists do is protect the interests of the ruling class, of the big capitalists, right? But it is not necessarily the ruling class, the big capitalists carrying it out, right? It is the little capitalists sometimes, it is the management classes, it is sometimes working class people like you and me who aspire to ruling class ideology, who then do the dirty work and perform as the running dogs of the capitalist class, right? And you see this because these people who are in Charlottesville, these people who are all over the nation right now, they are not generally working class people, right? There is this myth about this white working class that voted for Donald Trump, right? And in a lot of cases that's true sometimes here and there, but generally these are upper management people, right? These are small business owners. These are people who hang out at the country clubs. These are people who their favorite sport is like golf or whatever. And so these people do the dirty work of the capitalist class, right? They see progressive values as threatening to the capitalist structure, and they seek to stamp it out, right? And I think it points to who can participate in like a fascist movement, because there's a very, very distinct political point that one of my friends who was with me in Charlottesville made, and it's that, and it's something that Jason was talking about also, is that lack of police force versus the presence of the police force in July. In August, there was a very conscious decision being made to staff the police the way that it was. And this is decisions made by a Democratic mayor, a Democratic governor, who said it would be a bad look, it would be a really, really bad look if one of the police officers that we staffed for this event murders somebody. And which also gives you some clue as to like how inevitable they feel that is, right? It would be a bad look for one of the police to murder somebody, one of the counter protesters. So let's let the fascists do it for us. And they did. And when the fascists inevitably murder somebody, when the fascists inevitably harm somebody, we get to say, this is the Republicans' fault, right? Now the Republicans are to blame. We had nothing to do with this, right? And then it becomes a political victory for Democrats. You see where I'm driving this? We can no longer rely on electoral politics. We cannot rely on the left wing of the ruling class to do what we need to be done. So that's sort of that's how we have to be thinking about fascism, and that's how we have to think about sort of how mainstream this like fascist ideas are, and seek to combat it. But the most important thing, in which I'll make my segue into this crush capitalism thing, is you cannot destroy fascism without smashing the system that breeds it, right? And capitalism is the system under which we live. It is the system that breeds reaction. It's the system that breeds violent reaction, and it needs to be toppled before fascism can ever be smashed. And what I mean by that is all these forms of white supremacy we've been talking about, prisons, police, the military, is all of those protects capitalism, right? And all the values that it sort of perpetuates, white supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy, it's baked into capitalism. There's no getting around it. What makes private prisons so profitable? What makes the military so profitable? And this is sort of, there's this value that we are taught growing up, is that there's nothing worth getting for free in life, right? Like everything that's actually good, we have to work for, right? And they love to teach us that, right? But the same is not true for them. Capitalists love free shit, right? Because there's no investment. You have to make no investment. You take something for free, and you just profit off of it. And so look at the land that we live on now. Stolen, ripped from the people who already lived here, right? And they were murdered, just murdered in cold blood, forced to live in camps, and now they have all this land for free. Excellent. Look at slavery, chattel slavery, free labor, and they make all the profits off of that because they have to invest zero in running a slave trade. So that's really the connection that we have to look at. But also, we don't just live under capitalism. Am I right? We also live in its more advanced form, is imperialism, right? Capitalism cannot sustain itself within a very distinct set of borders, right? It must necessarily extend beyond its borders in order to continue to find new markets, in order to plunder for new resources. Before I was ever interested in revolutionary left thought, I was an anti-imperialist. My mother's from the Philippines, and I grew up not knowing a lot about the Philippines. But when I learned about the Philippine-American War, is anyone familiar with the Philippine-American War? It's a little bit, yeah. So I'll give you the long and short of it, is the Philippines was under colonial domination by the Spanish for 300 years. And finally, a very revolutionary Filipino nationalist movement was fighting back against the Spanish and kicking them out. The Spanish were losing, the U.S. sees it happening, and the U.S. and the Spanish are sort of in cahoots, and the U.S. says, look, you're about to lose this war, you're about to be kicked out, so why don't you let us take it from here? They said, we're going to stage this battle, we're going to look like we're helping the Filipinos kick you out, and then we'll pay $300 million for the Philippines. And there's a lot, 300 million sounds like a lot, but to buy an entire nation, right? And it's not adjusted for inflation, but it's still not a lot of money. So what happens? They kick the Spanish out. It looks like the U.S. is on their side. The Philippine nationals are writing a new constitution. All the while, the U.S. is propagandizing about these inferior Filipinos who are now the white man's burden, right? We now have to govern for them because they cannot govern themselves while they're writing a constitution. So then they declare war. They come in, the U.S. comes into the Philippines, murders 200,000 Filipinos. And this is not just the soldiers, right? There's orders in writing. There's dialogue that's been transcribed that says, who do you want us to kill? Somebody's trying to get orders from the commander, and the commander says, anybody ages 10 and up. 200,000 people, genocide. Why? Capitalism cannot sustain itself within its borders. It must expand to new territories and expand to new markets. The U.S. wanted a foothold, an economic foothold, because that's where the biggest new market was. And make no mistake, this is also how white supremacy expands itself beyond borders. And this is how, this is not just white supremacy, this is also, when the Spanish came to the Philippines in the first place, completely destroyed the way indigenous Filipinos thought about gender, right? It was not a binary system in the Philippines at the time. Pre-colonial Philippines had a spectrum of genders, and people who were considered, outside of like feminine and masculine, or considered both or neither, were like spiritual leaders, right? Destroyed by colonialism and imperialism. These are the kind of stakes. So I'm going to try to wrap this up and just sort of conclude. Like we need to be making really strong stances against imperialism. We need to be making strong stances against capitalism. We need to be building to topple both of them. And what that looks like for me, I've joined the Revolutionary Socialist Party. I recommend you join some sort of organization. I'm a little biased and going to recommend that you join a Revolutionary Socialist organization. I don't care which one. I'm Workers' World Party, join Workers' World Party, but just joining an organization, working with people, building solidarity, building a movement is more important than which organization you're working with. Just an idea of some of the struggles that we've got going on in Baltimore. We're building a People's Union for bus riders. Very recently, this governor, if you don't live in Maryland, you're probably not super caught up on Governor Hogan, but he presents himself as this like very moderate, reasonable Republican that sort of tries to keep himself separate from Donald Trump. We know this is not the case. He instituted this transportation system. First of all, cut a metro line that was going to be able to enable people from inside the city and outside the city to travel vice versa, cut that line, instituted a new line that just helps the DC Metro, and installed this new bus system that really just decreases dramatically service for people within the city and allows people to come in from outside of the city and not really vice versa. Some of the most egregious examples are there are 3 senior centers that are completely without transportation now, just completely stranded, and they can't go to the grocery store, they can't go to the bank. And like some of these senior citizens who just they're keeping themselves sharp, just being able to go out and interact with people, and when you don't have that access and you rely on so much more to even get there to the grocery store, it's just one of the more egregious examples of that. So we'll, in addition to that, I also want to formally invite people to come to the Workers' World Party Conference. This is not just for party members, not just for party candidates, it's for people interested in socialism, people interested in revolutionary history and theory. It's going to be in New York. I know that's a hike for a lot of people, but sometimes we're able to help people get there. November 18th, 19th, in New York City. That's my formal invitation. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.